Hello! We're live once again on a more theoretical and less fun stream. Well, I mean, depends on your idea of fun, but I will concede that intuitively most people find video games more fun than trying to define what arguing is. We are continuing the How to Write an Essay series, where I try to provide simple, honest tools and guides on how to write a school essay at a high school or entry college level. I'll go a bit over as to why in a second. But last week we went over on what a statement was. What is a declarative sentence? I mean, and statements and declarative sentences are not the same. A statement is a political act that tends to use, generally speaking, well, not always, declarative sentences to affirm that something is true, is the case, and so on. Depends on your particular epistemology or epistemic values. And today, me, Samuel, your friendly internet uncle that wants to help you get into philosophy, is gonna try to help people get a gist or just a basic enough understanding on what arguing is and what an argument is. I will not provide like the definite answers or the one size fits all solution to arguments. That is, I think, pretty much impossible. But even if it weren't, that is an incredibly vast philosophical problem, and there's just no way I can cover it in a Twitch stream. Basically, our guideline is, okay, I can't give like the total answer, but maybe I can provide something that's good enough to get people into writing, into doing their homeworks, into enjoying their high school / college experience a bit more. And hopefully that translates to being better thinkers, being more interested in understanding argumentation, reading slightly more complex books, getting an idea of the notion of a proof, and so on, so on. A lot of things I consider politically valuable. Speaking of politics, holy crap, what a week. As usual, I have to contend with the immensities of the world, the incredible, intolerable amounts of cruelty, death, and misery inflicted by the dominant class upon the rest of us. Because of internet bias and because these platforms are owned by said ruling class, I am hesitant to fully spell out what's going on, but what's happening in Lebanon is just... it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable to all sentient beings. I really wish this weren't the case, but it is. And I have to contend with the immensity of that misery and destruction, with the much more limited reach and capacity for change that I have. So I'll repeat this as much for myself as for the audience. What I want to do here is part of a political project. I want to help people become better citizens. I want to help people manage the differences and convince each other and engage in the game of asking and giving reasons without it being stressful or destructive. I believe that if more people learn to debate in an orderly, kind-hearted way, without insults, without screaming, the world will be a better place. And that is a useful element on the general goal of getting a more united and egalitarian society. So I really want to believe this contributes a little bit to making the world a slightly better place. Anyways, let's get to the meat and bones of what we're going to do today. First, a small recap. Okay, so I'm doing this because, due to several factors, which we went over in a little more depth last session, I'm seeing that a lot of... I know you're not kids, but I'm an uncle, so to me you feel like kids. But youths will be the more appropriate, less offensive term. Lots of youths in the 16 to 20... Ah! Hey, thanks for becoming as amigo, Janice045. Glad to know that the sound alerts do work. Why, hello there. Yep, you're as amigo now. So, yep. Gonna kick me my concentration there, but basically youths, people in the 16 to 22 age range, are noticing they're having a lot of trouble with writing. But I mean, not that they are writing bad things, is that they just don't even know how to start writing. It's not that they lack skill. It's that nobody has bothered to sit down and explain to these people, okay, how to write in a way that you can order your ideas and express your thoughts in a clear, concise manner. So that's what I want to do. Zero critical thinking abilities? I mean, not exactly zero, because zero will be just nothing. Even worse than some more complex animals such as crows or apes. So we're parting from these partial definitions, things we use not as definite answers, but just enough to form a coherent place to start working from. So we understand essays to be a short text to discuss a single idea or subject. If you want to discuss multiple ideas or subjects, then it's no longer an essay, it's going to become a book or thesis in the more technical sense. And I said that in order to discuss a single idea or subject, usually you want to provide an argument. And today we're going to go over what is an argument. And because there's going to be a single idea or subject, there should be a single or main argument. And yes, I understand that some essays are just free association, just say what you think. But we're gonna aim a little higher in terms of difficulty and clarity, and we're gonna establish that you want to argue for something. And this arguing has certain rules or necessities, depending on how you wanna frame it. So I put this last week, and we're going to go exactly over why this definition Is arguing the same as defending an idea? No, not exactly. Arguing is more complex. We're going to go exactly over what arguing is later on. But defending an idea is something you do while arguing, but it's not the entirety of arguing. You can do a lot more things while you argue. Anyways, so I put this last week as well. And this is like the boilerplate, simplistic, logically minded definition of argument. This is not a universal definition. This is not even a particularly popular one. It's only popular amongst specialists and people who do formal logic. But it was good enough to get us started last week. Now we're gonna go deeper into it and make it and point out some problems over this definition. So this is a summary of what we went over last week. We settled upon that a statement is a clear, simple, singular declaration. So a sentence that has multiple statements on it, well, can be broken down into those statements. And even a single grammatical sentence can be broken down into multiple statements, such as when you use the past perfect tense. A past perfect tense always includes at least two statements. That something began in the past and has continued to be relevant until this point in the present. By the sheer grammatical nature of the past perfect, that those sentences always include at least two statements. So while we went over that some of the limitations of this conceptualization of statement, they are very good for a simple high school/college essay. They're good enough for that. We can and definitely can criticize and should criticize them more, but we've settled that for now, statements can be taken as factual claims. A statement is a sentence or an act or an event that claims that something is factual or true. Whether you want to use facts or truth or anything else depends on what your preferred epistemic value is. Maybe you are like a strict believer in a solid truth, and so you want like the highest degree of certainty, and so you want things to be true with capital T. Or maybe your model of true is the strongest model so far, in which case you prefer a weaker version of truth, or and so on, so on. That is for another day. That is epistemology. Hopefully, something you can replicate if you were to do it yourself. Yes, that is going to be a good enough meaning. But we went over last week that the replication principle is not absolute. It's not perfect. But it's good to give you an idea of when to start in writing an essay. So we want, at least in writing, that our statements be done through simple declarative sentences. Subject, verb, predicate. As simple as possible. Shit like, John runs every other day. That level of simplicity and ease of lecture. Is there a VOD? I didn't know there was into part 2. Yeah, there's a VOD. I can link it. It should be on my YouTube, which is linked down in my Twitch channel description, but I'll fetch the link directly. Yep, it's good. It's good that it's in chat anyways. Okay, so we will consider statements to be like the building blocks of an argument. We want to simplify our writing so that statements can be almost equivalent to the sentences they occupy, but a sentence and a statement are not the same. So yeah, as you were mentioning, Janice, a good enough guideline to start can be taken from the idea of logical positivism and their notion of empirically verifiable. That is not, I wouldn't say that's correct, but it is intuitive and clear enough to get a start. We want to write about things that we could go out and replicate or verify. Replication is not the same as verification, because some events can only happen once, and thus we cannot replicate them, but we can verify them by either second-hand account or historical research, or by recreating the conditions of the experiment but not the experiment itself, and so on and so on. What is empirically verifiable remains an open philosophical question. That's not something we can solve. I strongly suggest that if you're interested, just idly ponder upon the question. What does it mean? So we know, okay, what is empirism and what is verification? What happens if I want to claim something is true but it's more of a matter of taste? Oh no, ads. I thought I made it so that ads will only roll once upon entering the channel. And cry emoji. Yeah. Jeff Bezos needs one more jack. A bigger jack. Okay, so yeah, at least intuitively, we want to make claims about things that can be checked. There's no masters here, only amigos, only friends. We're an egalitarian channel. Anyways, you want to write about things that could, at least in theory, mean that someone can go and perceive them and check them for themselves. Claims about your dreams, your tastes, claims about divinity, while perfectly valid in certain contexts, they're not useful in a school essay. I mean, not if you want to be honest about them. Anyways, that was for last week. And now that we have a good enough conception of the building blocks of an argument, we're going to discuss arguments by themselves. So, like many theorists in the area, we're going to make a distinction between arguing and argument. And arguments can also be subdivided in multiple ways. So we're going to use arguing, the verb in infinitive, as an action or event, something that happens in time. And we're going to take argument as the solidification or the modeling in a static form as a result of arguing. This is not something everyone agrees with. Some people will say, no, every argument, as much as you want to solidify them in text, is a form of arguing. You cannot separate the argument from the arguing, from the activity. And some people might say, no, What people call arguing is a messy, unresolvable event that is too mired up on displays of body language and dubious meaning to be taken seriously. An argument is the ideal form, and it should be written and it should be expressed as simply and purely as possible without any external elements. So yeah, it's not like a given answer. It's not a fact. Okay, it's a division that's going to help us understand things. It's not an undefeatable truth. Next slide. So this is an example definition from a book called A Dictionary of Philosophical Logic by Roy Cook, which is pretty much what it claims to be, a dictionary. You look for a term, and it provides with a small, very technical definition. The book is definitely in the post-Fregean logical camp. It is very much meant for mathematicians and people who engage in formal logic. But it is basically the definition that most academics and other technical users of the notion of argument employ, which is a very bare bones abstract definition that an argument is a sequence of statements. So there we go, why I need to go over statement first, where all but one of the statements are intended to provide evidence or support for the remaining statement. The special single out statement is the conclusion, and the rest of the statements are called premises. I think these terms have been in use since Greek antiquity, since the ages of Plato and Aristotle. So, in some very technical contexts, there may be more than one conclusion. Or you can derive, technical term, multiple conclusions from one set of premises. That is true in a mathematical sense, but we are in the context of writing essays, not mathematical proofs. So I'm just including that for completion, but it's not really something we're going to commit right now. So yeah, this is important. Next slide. Okay, this is a more robust definition that is more concerned with the sociological or political exercise of arguing, not argument. So, arguing in general can be understood as the act of explaining and justifying something to someone or against someone else. Let me break that down a little bit. In this sense, arguing is tied to some other functions, to some other activities. In the previous definition, we just took, it's more like a structural definition. We define an argument based on what it is built from. And here, this notion of arguing is based around what it intends to do in its function. Arguing is not so much about how you build it in this sense, but about what you try to achieve. And arguing in this sense wants to explain, to provide a greater understanding about the topic at hand, or to justify, which is a very important philosophical term. Here, justification means not justice in a fair way. It's not necessarily about moral arguments. It means that I can uphold my claims or statements against a court of peers. It means I am justified in believing or affirming the conclusion based on the premises. It's a difficult term. It is, again, an incredibly vast open philosophical problem that has been debated since thousands of years ago, and with no real conclusion anywhere nearby, because if you can define what justified means, basically you get to define all further rules and definitions, because you want rules and definitions to be justified. Some people, instead of using justified, use the term valid. And that's valid. It again, just like whether you want to use fact or truth, it depends a bit on your general philosophical background or framework. For now, we'll take the more political notion that justifying means being able to present an idea or a statement in a court of rational peers. Which, again, is a troublesome notion, because what is rational and what is a peer are also philosophical problems. Also very important for this definition is that arguing has a purpose: achieving understanding and agreement. Okay, so here's a problem. When you define something, you can define it in a descriptive way or a normative way. If you define something in a descriptive way, you're just looking at things and saying, oh, well, the people who argue do this. But when you're making a normative claim, you're saying, the people who argue should do this. You are imposing an order or requirement upon the people who do this activity. And for various reasons, which I'll try to explain throughout the series, I think we should incorporate a normativity on how we argue. We need to have like a general limitation on what we consider acceptable in an argument. And that is a normative standard. And I think that arguing should be done for the purpose of achieving understanding and agreement is a fair enough normativity, is a fair enough rule, because it allows us to exclude anything that does not wish to achieve understanding and agreement. If you wish to argue without achieving understanding, I mixed understanding and agreement, my bad. You are doing something that is potentially perverse and something that is confusing, because at least I understand that confusion and understanding are opposed in this sense. So the definition continues. Here we see the split between arguing and argumentation. Arguing is the general act, and argumentation is the finalized act or product of this activity. Another way of getting a gist of this difference is that arguing is in a continuous tense. It is an action that is taking place, while argumentation or argument is a noun, so it's something that is done, defined, complete. Furthermore, argument and argumentation are not the same thing. An argument is the finished, established, written, or as we'll see, constructed version of the argumentation. The argumentation is the totality of the act. So if I record a debate, while it is taking place, it is arguing. Once the recording is complete and the session ends, that was an argumentation. Hello, Rupert. Watched the first one a couple days ago to be ready. We are writing the fuck out of some essays on this one. Good. I hope it helps you with your work. You are exactly in the position or the demographic I'm doing this for. Okay. So arguing, argumentation, argument, tightly related concepts, but not the same. So being a discoursive, that means relative to discourse, the act of talking and communicating with each other. And intentional activity, that means when you argue, you don't argue by accident. It requires a conscious intent, a willingness, and a goal. You can do something that approximates arguing by mistake or by omission or by mere mechanical repetition, but in that case, you are not really arguing. You are being the mouthpiece for someone arguing through you. When a TV person recites propaganda, they are not arguing because they do not have the intention, they do not carry the intent to explain and justify something, nor do they want to achieve understanding and agreement. They want to get paid. So this is important. We cannot argue by accident. Arguing requires, as I said, conscious intent. It requires a goal, a specific aim. Genuinely arguing to get paid by TPUSA? Yes. America's favorite water fountain did not argue. He did a theater around arguing in order to normalize fascist talking points. See, and that's one of the examples I wanted to use to argue, circularly speaking, because we're gonna get a lot of that. We're gonna get a lot of circular arguments in arguing as to why we need a rejection criteria. Why we do want some normativity and some criteria of exclusion for what an argument is. Okay. And we get the last part by the end. Magdalene says, I'm excited to learn how to argue tonight. I'm tired of telling people I am not a chihuahua. America's favorite water fountain? So a very important piece of this definition is at the end. Argumentation is, by many people will say this is the main point or the most important part, meant to induce or pressure the recipients of the discourse, the discussion you're having, to assume or accept what is being proposed. And that is very tricky language. What does it mean to assume or accept a statement? This is something I went over with Solaris a couple of weeks back. And as an autistic person and a philosopher, this is something that I struggle with a lot. Because we do not have a shared, accepted meaning of what it means to accept a belief or to believe in something seriously. Meme answer, it aligns with my worldview. Real answer, something I can believe because my common sense is right. Well, the problem with that is that you're relinquishing your mental processes to an obscure and unconscious pulse. Do you decide what your worldview is? Do you decide what common sense is? Do you consciously intervene in your own mind when you read an argument and force your brain to say or to accept, oh, I believe this now? Or is it something that happens to you passively? That is the tricky part. We do not always know when we are being convinced. And that is scary. I'll provide some examples about this at the very end, but the summary so far is arguing, argument, and argumentation, they're different things, strongly related, but not the same. Arguing is the general activity as it happens in real time. Argumentation is the product of this. Once it solidifies, once it ends, once it becomes a graspable unit. An argument is a very technical unit of argumentation composed of premise and conclusion. And the goal of argumentation is to pressure the recipients or the peers in this discussion to accept the conclusion. Okay? I'll continue with this book. This is a little paragraphs down below. These processes, as considered, take place within the framework of an argumentation process that unfolds as a social practice. The bold is my choice. It's not bold in the text. The focus is something I want to place in. Arguing is political. Arguing by necessity is a political act. It requires people sharing a language and trying to address each other as peers. So when certain roach person asserts a claim as to the nature of people in West Asia or in different cultures, and then with his same filthy mouth claims to not be political, they are contradicting themselves. If you go on a public square, be it a message board, be it Twitter, be it Twitch, be it YouTube, and make claims about the world, whether these claims are of physical, natural, political, or aesthetic nature, and you try to back this up with answers, not with answers, with premises, with data, with examples and so on, you are engaging in politics. Yeah, no. It's Roach Boy, not Roach Lady. Very important distinction. Okay, so we cannot separate arguing from culture. We cannot separate arguing from a common language. We cannot separate arguing from shared values. And this is ultimately why I'm doing this, because if we do not know how to play fair and be kind to each other and engage in these kind of social practices, we're going to die. Like, for reals. And this social practice is governed by norms and conventions. We are always arguing from within a set of expectations and rules. They may be explicit or implicit. They may be stated clearly by a formal framework, or they can just be vibes. But they're always there. I know it's a meme, but I really take it to heart the moment in Metal Gear Solid 2 where Otacon says that acquaintances? I don't think that's the word. It's acquaintances? Acquaintances, there we go. Acquaintances agree, but friends argue. Yes. I very much agree. So these norms and conventions, they're always there. And I think it's best to make them explicit, because otherwise we will just coast on vibes and follow these conventions without understanding how they work. So something I want to do here is to make them as explicit as possible. And we start out by saying, hey, these norms and conventions that rule over our feelings and our rules of what is a valid argument, they're already there. Hello, Bert Baines. How you doing? And then Luis Vega. What are we up to today? We are going over the difference between arguing, arguments, and argumentation, all in the context of helping people write essays for high school and college range. We are going over some definitions, some introductory definitions of what is arguing, argumentation, and argument. And then Luis Vega goes over to provide some examples of what you can do while you argue. We can produce texts or performances while we argue. We can do expositions where we clarify ideas. We can criticize, where we show the flaws in the ideas of others. We can oppose them by providing better ideas or better alternatives. We can clarify, which is a more thorough notion of exposing. And most importantly, for political reasons, we can modify the intentions, attitudes, beliefs, or commitments of other people. Notice that exposition, criticism, and opposition, they are just techniques. But the goals, or what we wish to achieve, can be understood as changing intentions, attitudes, beliefs, or commitments. There's a game that's very close to my heart, Planescape Torment, and the guiding question of that game was, what can change the nature of a man? According to Luis Vega, a good argument can change their beliefs, and by changing their beliefs, you can change the nature of a man. This, of course, depends on one of those implicit norms and conventions, that people act according to what they believe. That is not always the case. Arguing will be active disagreement. That is one possible definition. Because we're in the context of helping people write essays, we've settled on more constructive definitions of arguing. Let me go back. We are taking a more neutral view of arguing as just the act of explaining and justifying. Bam. See, that is not arguing, that is force. Yeah, so you can argue, okay, if two people need explaining their ideas to one another, they may be in disagreement. But then it can be shown that once the clarification or explanation has taken place, they found out that the disagreement was merely illusory. So that is a possible critique of that notion of argument or arguing. Anyways, let's go to the bigger chunk of text. So we keep digging further and further. We've seen that arguing is a political practice. It involves justifying, clarifying, and making claims so that they are induce or pressure onto others. And hopefully we can make other people change their beliefs, their intentions, or their attitudes. But how do we do that? Okay. If arguing is a general activity, while we argue, we use arguments, little units of meaning or blocks of informational statements that seek to assert themselves in a way that the conclusion is backed by the premises. So that the goal of this is to make people accept the conclusion. While we do that, we are trying to demonstrate this special proposition, which is called the conclusion, so that it is justified, or Luis Vega says, substantiated. I don't like that word because substance is a tricky philosophical word that has very strong commitments. So a possible paraphrase is substantiated can mean, this is my words, it's not in the original text, made substantial, made real or meaningful. So in this meaning, the conclusion, if properly justified, is not mere words. It is something that either reflects reality or is real. In the same way we say that the theory of gravity is real, the theory of evolution is real. In that it is a particularly precise and strong model of the world as is. Arguments in the context of constructed conversation will be to a constructed proposition, sometimes chains of reasons to explain a specific assertion. Yes, I will argue in a bit that all good arguing requires some level of constructivism or level of cooperation. Arguing out of pure opposition leads nowhere, but that is in a little bit. So, proposition here is a very specific type of statement. So we went from declarative sentences to statements to claims, and some of these statements, by the act of presenting them in an argument, they are turned into propositions. They are things we are proposing to be true. So some examples of these propositions can be a resolution, a rule, a promise, a suggestion, a plea, or an assertion. Magdalene says, I'm not meant to attack your character, but to improve your understanding because I care about your betterment and can bear to see you being wrong. That is a bit parochial at the end, but yes. Even attacking the character of another person can be done in a cooperative, respectful way. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. An argument, under this meaning, is now an explicit linguistic unit. That's the word I was looking for. Like the visible tip of the discoursive iceberg of a frozen interaction or conversation. So, in this view, the tip of the iceberg is the constructed argument, that is simplified to the point of just being premises and conclusion. And the rest of the argumentation is a hidden piece of the iceberg that includes context, that includes motivations, that includes previous research, and so on and so on. Everything that took place in order for the argument to be able to be simplified into one little tight discursive unit. And I really like this part. That all of this in turn points to the problems of identifying, interpreting, and reconstructing arguments within the delicate relationship between the implicit and the explicit in their context. When you present an essay, yes, the argument is a very important and key part. But the argument should emerge organically after you express the context of the question or the prompt for the essay. The only context in which arguments can exist by themselves without any previous explanation or reduced meaning is in pure mathematics. Because pure mathematics is the study of things without context, things frozen outside of time. So in those spaces, you don't need context. You just need precise definitions. But again, that is the extreme case. For most essays, when it comes to history, philosophy, art, English studies, or whatever you might be in class for, it's good to think of the argument as the emerging result of all these past underlying struggles, which we can summarize as context. This unit consists of a conclusion, the proposition being justified or substantiated, one or more premises, the proposition is added to it, and an inferential link or connection between the two. Okay, that is just what we went over with the technical post-Frege notion of argument. And here I mean Frege as in Frege Gottlob, which is some 19th century proto-Nazi that mathematized a lot of logic. So one important term here is the idea that there is an inferential link between premises and conclusion. Now, what the hell is an inference? An inference is a mental process. It is the part in which your brain goes, oh, there is a relationship between these statements. They are not a mere list. The conclusion is asserted because of the premises. When you make that link, you're making an inference. When you solve a puzzle, you're making an inference. When you detect a pattern in a video game, you're making an inference. It is the preamble of logic. Logic, one of the many definitions of logic, is the study of inferences. And not everyone agrees, but that is one possible definition. So when you try to min-max your build in World of Warcraft, and you're taking all the relevant information, and you calculate and you come to a conclusion, oh, this set of armor is the most optimal to me. When you build a set of jokers in Balatro, and you calculate and you go, clearly this joker will give me more points with this hand, or with this style of play. All of those things are inferences. You're taking units of information and processing them. Well, World of Warcraft is the most bog standard MMO RPG out there. The example follows through even when you're talking about even Diablo. When you compare two or more pieces of armor to see which one's the optimal choice. That is strategic thinking, and that is a subset of logic, which we can study with game theory, the real one, not the show. So inferences are these mental processes in which we percolate or study the links between certain bits of information. So all arguments require inferences. Next slide. Oh no, did I close the thing? I closed the thing. Okay, I'm gonna put on some examples and you tell me if they are arguments or not. Warning, angry lady.
美国人没有去帮乌克兰打仗，北约也没有帮乌克兰打仗，他们只是不断的给乌克兰武器，让你打1年、2年、3年、4年，死的人是乌克兰，毁掉的是乌克兰。你看看整个乌克兰满面疮痍，几乎夷为平地，一整代的年轻人已经在战场上面消失了，还在打，打了以后有打赢俄罗斯吗？普丁有下台吗？俄罗斯有垮台吗？美国带着全世界向俄罗斯祭出最严厉、史上最恐怖的制裁——经济制裁。俄罗斯经济有垮吗？那难道台湾要变成第2个乌克兰？台湾有比乌克兰土地更广大、人口更众多吗？中国大陆的经济实力比俄罗斯小吗？中国大陆的军事实力比俄罗斯弱吗？中国大陆的统治政权比普丁更加脆弱动摇吗？台湾要成为乌克兰吗？
Okay, was that an argument? Okay, if that is an argument, what is the conclusion? Okay, Rupert says it's not an argument. Remember, in order for something to be an argument, there needs to be premises, conclusion, and an inferential link between them. This is the conclusion. This proxy war shit is such a waste of time. I don't think that's a conclusion. I think that's one of the main points. Rupert says, no real conclusion, just says that the US is fucking up in a vague manner. Okay, I did a little cheat, Rupert. Remember when I said that arguments point to their underlying context? This lady is part of the Kuomintang, the dominant political party in the province of Taiwan. That is a very important piece of context. Had a feeling, yeah. Okay, I will argue that that was an argument, and the conclusion is this. I think the conclusion she wants to reach is that Taiwan should not be the next Ukraine. So notice that is not a factual statement. That is a strategic claim. She never explicitly spells out the conclusion. But I think we can extract the conclusion from her actions, the context, and her general speaking points. And I think the premises are a bunch of things like... Premise number 1. If we follow the paths the Americans want for us, we will be like Ukraine. Premise number 2. Ukraine is a shithole. And their quality of life has been immiserated immensely from being part of a proxy war on behalf of the US. Premise 3. Ukraine fought a weaker government with bigger land mass and great amounts of people. In Taiwan, we have less landmass, less people, and our opponent is even more formidable. So, if they are having a bad time, us with less resources will have an even worse time. Conclusion: Taiwan should not be the next Ukraine. I think that is the reconstructed argument from her act of argumentation. So the tricky element of this is distinguishing between if what we saw was an argument or an argumentation. I think they are closely related and we can extract an argument from her actions and context. Okay, a more or a less explosive example. Is it an argument? I mean, in a very literal sense, we just saw a weird circle thing and some squares that fill with water. Like there weren't even words. How can that be an argument? The square on the left had more water? Yes! One side had more water than the other, but the bottom square had the most water of all. So what we just saw is a visual kinetic proof of Pythagoras' theorem. The square of the side A and side B of the triangle is the same as the square of the hypotenuse. And that was proved by transferring liquid from two containers to a third, such that the third container matches exactly the amount of liquid from the previous two. That was, in fact, an argument. In order to be legible, you needed some context. You needed to be at least a bit aware of what Pythagoras' theorem is, or on what the mathematical relationship between the squares of a triangle is supposed to be. But yeah, that was an argument. A proof, even. A mathematical proof. So, the point of this is that the notion of what an argument is very broad. So broad that it includes things that are not explicitly text. But they're still arguments. Now, next slide. I mentioned previously that I want some normative criteria to exclude things that are not arguments. I cannot tell you once and for all what is an argument, but I can tell you that I want to exclude things that are not an argument. How do I make proof these days with no water cubes thinking phase? Well, they do it with math, pure math. The water cubes are just a reinforcement. Anyways, so I want to exclude things that appear to be arguments or that claim to be arguments but aren't. Because the cost of engaging in duplicitous argumentation is very high. So I went to a good place where to find bad examples of things. WikiHow. So WikiHow in this article explains or tries to give tips about how to win an argument. And the first tip is look and sound confident. Have confidence. And look, I understand that we humans are social creatures. I understand that our brains use vibes. But the appearance of confidence has nothing to do with whether something is true or valid or justified. Those are just heuristics that our brains use to simplify work and labor. What I want to do is to intervene in these processes and try to convince you people to not rely on those vibes, on those automated processes as much. Just because someone says something while being very confident about it, that doesn't mean it's true. Once again, Kirkconnell mastered the theatric act of sounding very confident. But he was still an asshole. If you are part of a populace that only accepts belief based on those brain heuristics, those vestigial processes, you're going to be very easily misled. We have hundreds of years of study on how to fool people and trick them while appearing very confident. So much that that's what we call con men. Confidence tricks. We have a very perverse yet scientific understanding of propaganda. So this kind of shit, like just looking and sound confident, is what ancient Greek philosophers were pissing and shitting and whining about, because, you know, there was Plato, who we bash in his channel constantly, but one of his main gripes, one of the main reasons he was shitting and whining and pissing all day, was because it's not fair, because I want to teach these people wisdom, but then the sophists come and they teach them tricks. And 2,500 years later, here I am saying the same thing. Yeah, Professor Yang guy who believes in quantum bullshit, and including quantum miracles and quantum immortality. Yeah, anyone can train themselves to display certain body language. Thanks for the hydrate. Okay, I checked the VODs, and you're right, my bagging. You can hear my bones cracking. I didn't know it was so bad, but here you go. Yep. Someone make an ASMR compilation so I can go viral on YouTube. Anyways, so actors can easily train themselves into mimicking the signals of confidence. The heuristics of believing or paying attention to people who are confident, who speak in a certain manner, in a certain tone, and so on. These can all be studied and replicated. So arguing can be bypassed or fooled by these things we have taken to call rhetoric. I can't stand the thought of someone being more parasocial with you than me. Well, you see, the problem with that is that neither of us are small anime girls with knives, so... Anyways. Yeah, this gets into signal theory, into, you know, those kind of emotional bypasses that we can study to fool people into doing something about arguing. So I want to exclude this from what is an argument. An argument is not these tricks. Another awful tip that WikiHow gives that you should never follow is plan how to end the argument in advance. Okay, But if you already have a plan on how the argument is going to end, you're not engaging the argument with an open mind. You are not participating in the game of justifying and explaining. Yeah, you're taking argument as a turn-based RPG where you already have a set win condition. That's not an argument at all. That is doing something about arguing what is just dressed up despair. You have no hopes on achieving something meaningful with the other person, and instead of engaging with them, you already come with a predefined conclusion and a set of tactics to force the event into what you want. That is not arguing. Yeah, no. Arguing, like martial arts, is best understood as a genuine exploration of yourself and another reflected through playful cooperative combat. Like the idea that you go into an argument with the hopes that you'll win under predefined conditions that you have already decided, that is lawyer thinking. Do you want to be a lawyer? Fuck no. The only good lawyers are gay. Two gay boys called Phoenix Wright and Miles Edgeworth. And Phoenix Wright allows you to live the fantasy of a lawyer that finds out that their client is guilty and still does the right thing. But in the real world, you're supposed to defend your client no matter what. Basically, if you go into an argument with a preset conclusion and are unwilling to be surprised or understand that the other person might have a better grasp on reality than you, Al Pacino channeled Phoenix in that one movie, the one where he plays the devil. Because, yeah, that's a fun movie about lawyers. Oh yeah, point is, this is not arguing. If you go into arguing with a predefined conclusion or a set win condition instead of an openness, that's not really the point. And here we have WikiHow's example on how to win an argument even if you're wrong. This is basically why the internet is so shit right now. Do not concede ground can also be called by those of us in the know as corn cobbing, in reference to an infamous drill tweet that basically reads, I'm not owned, I cry as I keep being turned into a corn cob. Yeah. This is the worst thing you can do in an argument. And this is the main example as to why I think arguments should have an element of the cooperative. Because if you don't have any respect for anyone else in the argument, if you do not have any ounce of political will or cooperation, this is what all arguments are going to go for. Because, as we mentioned earlier, an argument wishes to change attitudes, intentions, and beliefs. And no one can force you to change your intentions. I can force you to act in a certain way. I can point a gun at your head and demand that you give me your money. But I cannot change your intentions, not through force. Arguments require an openness and a willing vulnerability. They require you to consciously accept and do the following mental process. I enter this space conscious and willing that I will change my mind if I find better reasons. Otherwise, just do this. Never concede. No one can force you to change your mind. And that is the greatest reason why arguments are inherently political. They are not just inherently political, they are a foundation for the possibility of politics in itself. Because the only way we humans have conceptualized the art of changing each other's minds, not through force, but through willing, respectful consent, is called argumentation. All other forms of change involve violence, whether it is coercion or outright force. When multiple entities have differing opinions, goals, and interests, that's called a conflict of interest. And the only peaceful, rational way in which this conflict of interest can be mediated is by the game of asking and giving reasons. That is, arguing. Arguing is inherently a cooperative act. It is inherently a political act, and it is the foundation of politics, of the sharing of goods and ills without there being overt imposition through violence. So, an argument is not something you enter with the thought of winning or dominating, as, again, a certain Mr. Kirk was about. I even forgot his first name. What was his first name? Charlie. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is the ultimate hacks. If you want to win, air quotes, any argument, you can just do this. No one can force you to concede in an argument. Yeah, Super Nintendo Charles Entertainment Kirk. So I think this is the main reason why I want to exclude certain things in arguing, and why I do accept the idea that arguing should be with the intent of achieving understanding and agreement. Without those elements, we get into the normie notion of arguing, where it's just screaming and shouting and misleading each other to see who wins, which basically just means until we tire each other out and finally the most stubborn person in the room gets what they want. If we want to avoid that, and I want to avoid that, then that's why I include a normative element to what an argument is. Okay, but now we have a problem. How can we agree on what an argument is? Because settling what an argument is basically settling the rules of the game. It's like who gets to write the Constitution. So throughout history, people have tried to find like an objective, neutral mediator to obtain the pure rules of argumentation. And if that sounds like liberalism, it kind of is. Liberalism is a byproduct of this attempt to find pure, neutral, non-political rules behind who gets to be right. And I'm sorry to say, that has not been achieved. But in the attempt, there have been some interesting results. Mathematical proofs, logic, formal logic, and computation are highly successful. They kick ass. They're really good. They are part of what allows me to be streaming this through my computer. And computation is objective and neutral in the sense that we're tricking a bunch of rocks to do calculations for us. And rocks do not have intentions, so kind of almost there. The problem with that is that all computation needs to be interpreted by humans. So, bit of a problem there. One of the main arguments, people claim that formal logic and mathematized argumentation has to be a science is because, well, most scientists use them to build their theories. So if we say that this kind of human practice is not a science, we're saying that science is not backed by science itself, which is something not many people like. Rupert says, discrete mathematics and logic are as the magical system that allows us to trick rocks to run simulated worlds for us. Yep. Except it's not magic at all. It's the opposite of magic. It is completely deterministic. So, counter-argument to that. Persuasion, agreement, and reasonableness are very complex events, and they lose their meaning to a dangerous degree when you quantify them. So, you can't have a science of something that you cannot really quantify, not without some heavy losses at least. And generally speaking, the less abstract and more complex the subject of the debate or argument is, the less useful mathematizing it tends to be, because the tools you need to mathematize an event grow increasingly complex with the complexity of what you want to model. Or you can just take the laws and mathematically model something complex as something very simple, but that is kind of missing the point. You're losing important structure behind what made the actual phenomenon at a debate matter. Anyways, so can we have a general science or method or like one-fits-all solution as to what is an argument and how to make perfect arguments? Not really. I mean, not now. It's an open problem. And I don't think it's going to be. I don't think we have that. Like, even as a self-proclaimed Marxist, even as a believer in dialectical materialism works because it is an open philosophy. It is a philosophy that says, no, we are never done. We're constantly in the process of refining our models, of getting better answers. There are no fixed points in reality, so we have to keep progressing and moving, but never quite reaching any stable fixed point. So, I mean, you're perfectly free to disagree with me. That is the entire point of this. But so far, there is no unified, agreed solution to the problem of how to make a good argument. But, again, we're not trying to solve the philosophical problem once and for all. I just like to do this because I don't want people to become close-minded, as we just saw. I don't want people to end this stream and go, oh, I know how to argue. I will argue perfectly now and forever from now on. Not really. And I like people, and I will invite people to think about these things as problems, not take them as solutions. Anyways, in the context of writing an essay, that is much more simple. We can take a working model, which we know has problems, which we know is not absolute, but again, it is good enough to get us writing. That is, generally speaking, the guiding principle of this series. Good enough to get us writing. And I'm gonna try to explain some general rules or principles on how to get you good enough to write an argument for the time being. Usually, almost always, your teachers will give you prompts. Will give you either the statement which you're supposed to argue in favor of, or a general goal with options. So they can say something like, show that the Titan's Goblet by Thomas Cole is an example of mystic landscapes as a subgenre of romanticism in the 19th century. So that is a conclusion they want you to reach. Another possibility is that they tell you, okay, write for or against the death penalty in a legal setting. Argue that states should have access to the death penalty, or argue that states should not have access to the death penalty as a legal resource. So those are examples of things that serve as conclusions, and that should give you a guiding principle to center your essay around. Now you know that they are conclusions. And because they are conclusions, they need to be backed up by premises and an inferential link. Okay, just for reference, this is the painting of the previous example. This is the Titan's Goblet by Thomas Cole. And yes, that is an example of mystic landscapes, or landscapes as mysticism in the context of Romanticism in art in the 19th century. So if you wanted to make that argument, you will first have to define, okay, what is Romanticism in painting in the 19th century? So you will begin that essay by writing the context of the conclusion. Okay, you will go, okay, in this essay, I want to argue that this painting is an example of Romanticism. And Romanticism in this context is understood as an artistic movement in the first half of the 19th century that is exemplified by ta 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 ta. So when you say X is an example of Y, you're saying that X falls into the category, the greater category of Y, that X is an element of Y. So you need to explain what things enter in this category and which things they do not. And in order to fit into a category, you need to fulfill at least some criteria. Now, this criteria might be strict, in which sense you need to fill every element, or it can be fuzzy. Like, okay, if there are 12 elements and you fit and you fulfill 8 out of 12, that's good enough, and you fit into the category. Okay, that's fine. So we start with the conclusion, because this is an essay. This is not an open debate. This is an exercise, and you start thinking, okay, if I want to prove this, what does it mean? You start breaking it apart. In this example, your conclusion is this is an element of this category. And in order to enter a category, you need criteria. So you need to explain, okay, so Romanticism is this. It started because of this. The criteria for something to be included as a romantic painting is this and this and this and that. And this painting fits this criteria. Because it fits enough criteria to fall into the category, I can conclude that The Titan's Goblet by Thomas Cole is an example of mystic landscape as understood as a subgenre of Romanticism in the 19th century. And that is an argument. Other examples of prompts or conclusions that you may be asked to argue for in a school setting. The first one is, all human beings have rights and should be treated as citizens under the law. Therefore, Palestinians should be respected as people. Palestinians should be respected as people is the conclusion. So, what will it take for you to argue for that? What sort of statements are required to guarantee or pressure the truth of this conclusion as something a sensible, rational person should believe in? Chat, can you think of a possible premise or backing up statement that will help the conclusion that Palestinians should be respected as people? Okay, while you think of that, I'll keep reading the other examples. Physics describes a universe of determinate causal chains. Freedom requires that human acts and choices, that is correct, be their own cause. We conclude that humans are not free. Not do war and human crimes against them. That is not a premise, McLagan. That is a statement that can be concluded or that can be extracted from the conclusion. Once we respect them as people, then we cannot do war and human crimes against them. The order is is twisted. Before something can be cataloged as human crime, you need to make sure that the recipient of said crime is a human. And that is the conclusion. So, yeah. Humans are not free is the conclusion of the second sentence. And this argument is based on physical causal determinism. Third example, art is a human activity that requires no justification or purpose. Art can take any shape or intention. Because of this, art is an empty term that can refer to anything. That is the nihilistic conclusion of art as a medium or technique. Notice that in these sentences, I provide, before the conclusion, these funny words. Therefore, we conclude, because of this. Those type of words or phrases, those indicate that there is an inference happening. Hello, NTC. NTC with the following candidate for premises. You want to be treated with respect as a person. Would you want to be disrespected as a human if you were Palestinian? The counter argument to that is usually, oh, but I believe in a strict hierarchy in which some humans have more rights and more privileges and get to rule over others. That's basically the Nietzschean response, or the Nietzschean justification for hierarchy. So in this back and forth, we have concluded that NTC believes that rights are egalitarian. Rights are for everyone. So in order to make those premises valid, you will need a previous premise, which is to claim that if rights are withheld by some, then they can be withheld from anyone, depending on certain governing powers. So that, in that way, the appeal to self-interest underlying these premises will land. So yeah, arguing, tough. It's not easy to make arguments. It's not trivial. It is considered by some of the people I've quoted an art. And some people want to see it more of a science, and some people see it more of a virtue, something you cultivate. I think they're all right in their own ways. Palestinians are human people with a long verifiable history, threatened by an equally verifiable, openly settled colonialist supremacist ideology that seeks to perpetuate the conditions to erase them. Yes? But those are factual statements. And the conclusion to our example is should be respected. So you need to include at least a normative statement, basically a statement that involves a should, to make it land, to have the argument be stronger and connected. Anyways, I have to keep going. Next slide. So, in very practical terms, you want to write an essay? Okay, you have to write a lot of things. But among those things, you have to write an argument. And usually, you're either given a main conclusion or a suggestion that narrows the field of discourse, and you have to settle for a statement which you want to argue for in this select narrow field. Then, once you have your statement that you want to defend, your thesis, okay, Rupert, that is a linking premise. Yep. Okay, cool. Usually, the ideal of intellectual inquiry is to just be completely open-minded, free of biases, and investigate without any prejudice and find truth. That is a fantasy. We are never free of biases in that way. We want to keep an open mind, but we also have to recognize that we have interests and that we need to narrow our focus and to provide some structure to our thinking. So usually we start with a hypothesis, with a statement we suspect to be true, but are not completely committed to. In the case of doing your homework, no, you're giving a thesis. You're giving something that, okay, imagine this is true, or settle upon this as true, or just trust your teacher into believing this is true, and then find reasons for it. So it is a bit of a backwards reasoning. We're reasoning from the conclusion, which is not always good, because that can lead us to rationalizations. But again, we're in the context of homeworks, and we want to trust our teachers for now. Once we have settled and simplified our thesis statement, our conclusion as much as possible, then we need to do research. We need to obtain as much relevant information as possible that could help us backing up our conclusion. That is basically research, and that involves reading. It is inescapable. Sorry, you have to read. Thankfully, reading has never been easier. We have the internet, we have libraries. If only corporate fuckers left us alone, we will still have Library Genesis, C Library, and NS Archive. Same, I love downloading PDFs. Yeah, thankfully we still have Sci-Hub. But yeah, once you have your conclusion, you have simplified it, understood it, you want to read as much as possible, which in school essays ranges from a week to a month or so. So how to do research is something I'm also going to cover on this series. But for now, just ask people, ask your professor. Usually, but not always, in your classes you have a syllabus. And the syllabus should have suggested reading. If your syllabus does not have suggested reading, fucking talk to your teacher, ask them, tell them, hey, what books did you read in order to make this course? If they cannot answer that, run away. I mean, I know some people really need their grades, but if your teacher does not have like a bibliography or suggested reading to complement the course, it's gonna be a shit course, I'm sorry. So then you can then follow some of these suggested readings, find one that appeals to you, and start reading. Crack that book open. Once you have information, once you have a general context of the problem, you can structure this into statements. You read a lot of things, but now you want to simplify them into blocks, into units of information. And that is going to be your premises. And now comes the trickiest part. You have to guide the reader into the following. If they take your premises as true, then the conclusion you want to reach, your thesis statement, the prompt you were given as homework, then that has to be true as well. Notice the apostrophe. That is because has to be true is very strong, and we cannot always guarantee with such strength or such determination that the conclusion is true. We can make other types of connections. We can claim that it is likely to be true, which is when we use an argument from authority, which are different from fallacy of authority. So what's the difference between an argument from authority and a fallacy from authority is this connection. A fallacy from authority, or known by the Latin scholastics ad verecundiam says, because the master said it, it is true. The argument from authority says, because a respected authority wrote or concluded this in a peer-reviewed publication, it is very likely to be true. The difference between the fallacy and the argument is that in the fallacy version, you are claiming that authority makes something true, while in the argument from authority, you are indicating that authority is a strong signal for something being true. It's somewhat of an abstract distinction, but it's worth thinking about this difference. Signaling truth and making truth are different phenomena. Confusing the two is what makes one a fallacy and the other a useful argument. Why do we need arguments from authority? Because we cannot argue or prove anything from first principles all the time. We will go crazy. We need to accept that there are authorities in this world, and we need to show some trust in these institutions and authorities, even if they are bourgeois institutions. I'm sorry. If we wish to dispute these authorities, we can and we should. But it's a difficult job. And unless you want to prove all of science by yourself from first principles, by merely acting within a society, we believe and accept the authority of certain institutions, like in Mexico, the Profeco, or other institutions that control food and drugs. We cannot realistically study all of the medicine and all the food we take. We have to believe in these authorities. It's simply a necessary part of reality, of social reality, my bad. Another connection or inference that makes an argument likely to be true is known as an inductive proof. It's like, okay, I cannot prove this with total certainty, but I have provided several things that make it increasingly likely to be true. We can also strengthen likelihood into a more mathematical or statistical statement as probably true. If I want to prove that all mammals are viviparous, it is very statistically likely, yes. And until we found the platypus, we could even consider that to be true. The problem with statistical likelihood is that we only require one counterexample to defeat the claim. But such is life. Statistically likely to be true or probably true does not mean absolutely true. Another way we can say, oh, this is probably true, is if we have several competing explanations and we argue that ours is the best one. Why is this stronger than likely? Because we believe basically one of the fundamental takes or starting grounds to the whole game of asking and giving reasons is that everything has an explanation, or that we should be able to provide an explanation for everything. We do not believe in unreasonable events. We are not Lovecraft protagonists that face the unexplainable or the unspeakable. And even if we did, we will know that we cannot argue rationally for or against that. So by just being in the game of arguing, of asking and giving reasons, we believe that everything can be provided with an explanation. And so the best explanation has the most probability of being true. These types of arguments all have different names. The argument to the best explanation is called argument by abduction. But that's a little more of a technical lingo if you really want to get into it. For the sake of writing essays, this is good enough. Another example is the argument from analogy, which is, okay, I'm going to argue for something, and I'm going to liken it to another case. So if you believe in this other case, then you should believe in my case that they are analogous to each other. I am not a fan of this type of argument. I believe in analogies can be useful for creating greater understanding. So they're useful as teaching tools, but they are not useful to guarantee truth. It's just too messy, and it's very easy to be misled by analogies, so I tend to avoid them. But generally speaking, we want the strongest argument that we can, and those we call deductive arguments. Those are the arguments that guarantee the conclusion based on the premise. And the study of how can statements, premises guarantee the truth of a conclusion is a study of argumentative logic. There are other fields that address this. There's just argument theory in general. But the interesting thing about deduction is that it is very much a mathematical model. Yeah, MTV 14, that's really the danger of analogies. An analogy has to in turn be defended by another argument, which is, oh, these cases are comparable. And then you have to argue that. And you can go into an infinite regress. So yeah, another reason why I'm not such a big fan of arguments from analogies. So one of the cool things about deduction is that it's basically the foundation of mathematical thinking. Because it is inference from necessity. And a deduction means it is necessary that the truth of the premises imply the truth of the conclusion. That is the standard view. I do not like that word truth because it has like this Platonist metaphysical background. This is the object of my thesis, like my grad thesis. I can explain that if you want someday. I've been translating in Twitch. I personally like to think of deduction as pure informational analysis. So when we deduce a conclusion from the premises, we are doing pure analysis from an information point of view. The premises guarantee the conclusion if the informational content of the conclusion was already in the premises. That way we can avoid the whole problem of what is truth, what is fact, and just do Shannon calculus to see if the argument is valid. Oh yeah, that's a good place to mention. When an argument is deductive and it is correct, we call that argument valid. When the argument is valid and also the premises are true, like factually, empirically true, scientifically true, we call that argument solid. And a solid argument is kind of like the gold standard of what an ideal argument should make. Truthful and valid, which means that we have to accept the premises. We have to accept the premises and therefore the conclusion. So the problem with this is that deductive arguments are therefore not really about finding new things or expanding knowledge. So that is debatable, because knowledge is not so much about what we have, but about what we understand and what we can present to each other in a community. So we can think about deductive arguments as meticulous, detailed explanations of what the initial premises already contained. And because the elements of the conclusion are already in the premises, it would be absurd to want and not want the premises, to accept and not accept the premises. So that is the kind of convincing power behind some of the strongest arguments we've done through history. And this is not really something I expect people to pick up today. But if you really like this, you can learn formal logic. And what you can do with formal logic is that you can abstract and simplify the problem of deductive validity by turning it into a mathematical calculus. Just like algebra, you just start decomposing and applying rules and formula until you get the result. And this evil magic on the right is what you learn in philosophy when you take logic classes, or what you learn in computer science when you take discrete mathematics, or I think in mathematics you also learn it as algebra, Boolean algebras. Should you learn formal logic? Yes. Okay, you want an argument. Yeah, Rupert. If you want, you can go to philosophy, to the Faculty of Philosophy next semester and join Logic 1. They don't care. You can take that class. No one will stop you. Yeah, you can just do it. I mean, if you want a grade or a credit, you need to do some things in your faculty. But if you just want to learn, you can just take the class. I love free open education. So, arguments in favor of you picking formal logic, even though it will make you a massive nerd. So, in general, when you formalize something, you remove a lot of the emotional impact. Remember when I went over how arguing may require some hell yeah. How rhetoric displays and confidence games are not arguing? Well, once you turn everything into symbols and math, you basically kill any rhetoric persuasiveness out of the argument, which is good and bad, but it's useful if that's what you want. So it's a mental aid. It can order your thoughts. Yeah, it's something I miss from being in UNIV. Just, because I went to a faculty where there's lots of careers, including history. I was like, hey, fuck it, I want to join a class on art history, and I just did. And we were just like 8 people in that class, so basically personalized learning, really useful stuff. So, formal logic can help you break down faulty arguments really, really well. Formal logic is ass at persuasion, but it's going to help you block faulty arguments all day long. It's automatic. It's really good at that. And if you want to get into math or computer science, it's fundamental. You're going to do it anyway, so fuck it, learn. It's useful. And through that, you can learn the concept or the practice of proof, mathematical proof, which is, again, an incredibly useful practice. But the most important reason why you should learn formal logic is so you can become a redstone engineer. Surprise! Minecraft is logic. Minecraft runs on the exact same rules as propositional logic. So yeah, it's a gateway into engineering. Also really useful if you want to play Zachtronics games. Basically, the idea of mathematical reasoning, of deductive logic as an abstract form, is central to computer science and engineering. So if you're even mildly interested in those things, learning formal logic is an excellent use of your time. Okay, let's say you don't want to learn formal logic just now, or you want something that's going to help you as is. Okay, fine. You can still have a better than nothing approach by just intuitively abstracting statements into units. You can take, statement A is this. You extract the statement from the sentence, you write it in a simplified form, and you mentally give it a variable. Statement A, statement 1. And then you can make a diagram of the argument. Not this argument. This argument is not diagrammed well. It's just for visualization. You take each statement in the text, turn it into a unit, a single block, and then start thinking, okay, this statement is backed up by this other one. C is backed up by A. And so you draw a little line or a little arrow. And if I put C and B together, that is backup, or that justifies the conclusion D. See, this is just a picture example. That's just a very simple way to make an argument diagram. So what you do is you follow the methodology I just gave. You start with your conclusion, your assigned prompt. You research, you start writing, and then once you do your review of your own text, you go, okay, let me diagram my own argument. Is it coherent? Is it connected? Does it make sense? Or is it just a bunch of disparate points? If I make it that this statement is A, that connects to this, that connects to that, the diagram makes sense, it flows. Or then you go, never mind. Turns out that this point or sentence E I wrote has nothing to do about it. Never mind, I'll ignore it, or I'll edit it out, I'll cut it out. So yeah, even intuitively, abstracting a little bit of your writing helps with ordering your ideas. And from that, you can learn formal logic, which is cool. Okay. Once you're actually writing an argument, be kind to your teachers and readers. As we mentioned, arguing is a cooperative event. You're not there to pound them or to win or to crush them with facts and logic. If that's your attitude, it's gonna suck. Don't be like that weird student that laid down a trap for the teacher to get into the right-wing grift. That sucks. Don't do that, please. Imagine that your teacher is a person that is working and has to grade dozens of essays. So keep that in mind. Make sure all of the elements of your arguments are statements. They are not opinions, they are not conjectures, they are not just things you dreamt about. Remember that our criteria for now is empirically verifiable. Label your argument explicitly. I don't care, be lame with your writing. You can have style later. Right now, just getting you to write matters, and simplicity is king. Say it out loud. I will present my argument now. This is my argument. These are my premises. I will now provide the conclusion. I conclude this. Ta ta ta. We teachers grade anywhere from 8 to 50 essays a week. We value simplicity. Trying to be witty, trying to be profound, deep, using metaphors, poetry. There's a context for that. If you want to do that, go on Tumblr. Open an art gallery, I don't care. Knock yourself out. But when it comes to school essays, please, simplicity. We are going to grade you better. We're going to give you better grades if you write with boring simplicity. Simple sentences, Subject, verb, predicate, period. I want to do this. I will attempt to do this. This is my point. All of that helps us immensely. Trust me. I graded essays for 11 years. Another way to learn how to write better arguments is by monkey. Monkey see, monkey do. Once I have polluted your mind with this definition of argument or with this mental structure that conclusions are backed by premises and indicated by an inferential nexus, start looking out for them. When you're reading, when you're watching something, when you're talking to other people, like I can do this almost immediately because I have that kind of permanent brain fixation now. But at the beginning, you're gonna have to like force yourself to mentally imagine, okay, what is this person saying? This is their goal, this is their conclusion. And how are they defending this sentence? Okay, with this, and that. Take the conscious mental effort to break down people's words into conclusion and premise. Okay, here you have one of my favorite historical arguments. This is Galileo's argument or refutation of Aristotle about the velocity of falling objects. He wrote this on Motion. That's how it's usually translated, but the book name originally is De Motu Antiquora. And he has this thing where he depicts his position as a Chad and the other guy as Simplicio, as a simp. Basically, Salviati is super witty and clever, and the other guy is basically depicted as someone of low intelligence. Not that I agree with, but just to show that depicting your opponent as a bad caricature has been a thing for at least hundreds of years. So the argument is as follows. Aristotle claims that heavier things fall faster than lighter things. Because if you drop a ton of steel and you drop a ton of feathers, the feathers fall slower than the steel. And that's what leads some people to believe that a pound of feathers is lighter than a pound of steel. But it's not. So that is the intuition. But then Galileo comes, okay, let's assume this is the case. If then we take two bodies being any object with mass, whose natural speeds are different, it is clear that on uniting the two, the more rapid one will be partly, here Galileo uses the R word, but in its context it just means slowed, made slow by the slower, and the slower will be somewhat hastened by the swifter. Do you not agree with this? In my opinion, you are unquestionably right, says Simplicio, which is basically the posture by Aristotle, and thus in the Western world for the next 2,000 years, I think? Almost 2,000 years. So you have one body, 1 pound of steel, and half a pound of feathers. According to Aristotle, the pound of steel should fall faster than the pound of feathers. The half pound of feathers, my bad, because the weight is different. So Galileo goes, okay, so if they have natural speeds, and if we put them together, then the faster object or the heavier object will be slowed down by the lighter object, because each object has a natural speed. Okay, but if this is true, and if a large stone moves with the speed of, say, 8, doesn't matter what 8 means, just 8, just pure magnitude, while a smaller moves with a speed of 4, then when they're united, the system will move with a speed less than 8, because the slower object drags down the faster object. But the two stones, when tied together, make a stone larger than that which before moved with a speed of 8. So it should at the same time move faster and slower. Hence, the heavier body moves with less speed than the lighter, an effect which is contrary to your supposition. Thus, you see how, from your assumption that the heavier body moves more rapidly than the lighter one, I infer that the heavier body moves more slowly. This is known as argument ad absurdum, which is when you take the premise of your opponent and show that it leads to contradiction or absurdity. Yeah, reductio ad absurdum, reducing to absurdity. Or in visual form, if you take a big rock and a small rock, according to Aristotle, the big rock should fall faster, the smaller rock should fall more slowly. But if you put them together in a system, the whole system weighs more than the sum of their parts, which means it should go faster. So, if Aristotle was right, heavier objects should fall, or heavy compound objects should fall faster yet slower at the same time in the same way. That is impossible, therefore Aristotle is wrong. And all objects fall at the same speed regardless of mass. We know this is the case, and many people think that Galileo used this as an empirical experiment, like he actually threw the rocks and measured them from the Tower of Pisa. Not the case. It was an argument, purely abstract argument that shows that the premises from which Aristotle started and the conclusions which he got are contradictory. Anyways, we are past the hour session, which will be a full class. This is the further reading. This is the text I used on making this. The Use of Argument by Stephen Tolman. That's probably the one I can recommend the most for English speakers. You can find it easily. Just Google it, and you can do a bit of spontaneous digital archiving. A Dictionary of Philosophical Logic by Roy Cook, which is more if you want to get into like technical terms about formal logic. And Compendio de Lógica, Argumentación and Retórica by Luis Vega Reñón and Paula Olmos Gomez as editors. It's a very good introductory text for just general things about arguing and logic, but it's in Spanish. So good for Rupert, bad for almost everyone else on chat, I think. And technically, I got the images from WikiHow, but those are the examples on what not to do. So I guess WikiHow is a good example it's a good resource on what not to do. So yeah. And that's it. That's the presentation. If you want homework for this, usually what I will do in classes is ask my students to find at least 3 arguments from things you either read or watch and source them. Like, not just John Doe told me this. Just identify 3 different arguments from what you read or what you watch. It can be the news, it can be TikTok, it can be other streamers. But obviously, this is just purely optional. There's no way I can grade you. It's just if you want the free work. Anyways, I hope this was a good introduction to arguing, argumentation, and arguments. I want to keep these streams at least around the 2-hour mark because I want them to be like not a full commitment. Yeah, sure, you can send the homework in chat next stream, or you can send them to me on Blue Sky. That's fine too. Again, it's really honor system, so it's a type of self-directed mental practice, which I think is generally good if you want to argue. If you want to generally play the game of asking and giving of reasons. We saw that the game of asking and giving of reasons, because it involves a change in intentions, in attitudes, it's something that you can only do if you consent. So that requires you willfully, consciously, manually making your brain do things. One of the big reasons I like arguing and I like yielding when someone has better reasons than me is because I think that's an exercise of freedom. Maybe not in a metaphysical sense, but I like the idea of rationality as a virtue in which we learn to not be guided by what the ancients called passions, but we call now our brains or our unconscious impulses. When we hear a good argument and manually integrate this belief into our belief systems, and we manually, consciously introduce the conclusion as part of our belief systems, we are choosing how to build ourselves. We are exercising being a person and not just a brain piloting a meat sack. And that is my argument as to why you should value arguing as well. I hope that was convincing, or at least persuasive. Have a good night, everyone, or rest of the day, depending on your time zone. If you have any questions, now's the time. Remember that you can always come on Saturdays or maybe some other day of the week if you have issues with your homework, if you want help with research, if you want... basically I'm extending the service. Like, I'd rather you ask me about how to do something than ask ChatGPT, Grok, or whatever the fuck. I will not charge you, and I am way more reliable than those sycophantic chatbots. Well, yeah, I need to remind myself that this is international and we have time zones. Hope you had a good breakfast, MTV14. But yeah, if there are no further questions, I'm gonna stop the stream now. This was Samio, your friendly internet uncle that wants to help you get into philosophy. Bye.